And most founders start something from passion. That's another thing. We're starting from passion. We're not thinking, I need to go into tech because that's where all the good exits are. Or now I need to go into climate tech because that is where all the money is going. And it's actually like knowing what narrative those VCs want to hear, I think is really important in knowing like how to get to that journey.
You're listening to Not My First Guest. I'm Hattie Willis, your host, and each episode I talk to an entrepreneur, investor, or startup expert to unpack their hardest moments, biggest wins, and hard-earned advice so we can shortcut our learnings as founders together. Today I'm joined by Jasmin Thomas, serial founder and angel investor. After a successful career building the first teams of unicorns like Deliveroo, Algemy, Improbable and Dark Trace, Jasmin turned her hand to her own business. Having been diagnosed with MS, Jasmin had experienced the benefits of CBD oil firsthand, from relieving period cramps to flare-ups she was having. From this, she was inspired to start her own efficacious skincare company, Ohana Health. However, as she soon found out, having a CBD-based product brings even more challenges than your regular startup. And once she realised it wasn't a VC backable business, she made an even bolder move to shut the company down. Now she uses the valuable insights she gained through that experience, along with a deep passion for supporting women in various capacities, particularly early stage founders and those in the tech industry, to fuel this next phase of her career. Her dedication is channeled through her work with angel community Alexandria Angels, where she focuses on investing in exceptional deal flow at the early stages, aiming to diversify cap tables, as well as acting as a venture partner and scout for VCs and as a consultant, collaborating with pre-Series A startups. She's also committed to supporting the development of gender-diverse tech teams, bridging the gap for women in tech and STEM fields with tech recruitment agency Zenna. In case you couldn't already tell, she's a rather remarkable leader in the community and has even been highlighted by Richard Branson as an entrepreneur to watch for her exceptional drive and vision. In this episode, we discuss thinking outside the box as a core founder skill, asking VCs the right questions while you raise, the secret value recruiters bring to the table, how intention and self-awareness lead to success, and unearthing hidden hurdles in your industry early. So without further ado, let's get started. So, first thing we always want to start with is your journey into entrepreneurship and how natural it felt for you. Was it something you'd always thought you'd do? And if it was, did it meet expectations? And if it wasn't, how did you end up doing it?
It absolutely wasn't something that was planned. I really just enjoyed working. I went to enroll into university, went to 2 lectures and was like, I just want to go back to my job and work. And I got into my career very young. So I was in my chosen career, which was exec search from when I was 20. And what led me to entrepreneurship, I did feel like I was lacking a passion. And I remember being quite envious of people who like music or who did art because they were just so passionate and like no matter what, they just loved it and they wanted it for free. And I was just like, this is so great. I want to have a passion and a love like this, but nothing ever sparked my interest. I was then diagnosed with MS in 2015, which led me to using medical cannabis as a chosen option to manage my symptoms. And I did that for 2 years, and I really got into being an advocate for the legalization of cannabis medicinally, looking at what other routes in which it could help people, and actually became really passionate about that. And that is what led to my journey into entrepreneurship, because from then I went to found Ohana CBD, which was an all-natural CBD skincare line that used clinically proven plant-based, it's a bit of a tongue twister, clinically proven plant-based actives with CBD to produce functional and efficacious skincare that put women's well-being first. And it was then I built my first community, built my first brand, really got involved in the startup ecosystem. And it was very naive, it was very blind, and it was just very accidental. But once I got into it, I was kind of hooked, and that was like almost 7-8 years ago. And then obviously now I've just been on a journey of entrepreneurship ever since and loved every minute.
So that journey into starting Ohana, what were some of the things that went right? What were some things that went wrong? You said there was like some naivety in there, which I think a lot of founders will resonate with. Like you don't really know what you're getting involved in, otherwise you probably wouldn't do it. But then you do it and you love it and you can't stop. So what were some of the things that, and as you say, you're having to build a skincare product from scratch, build a community around it, build a brand. That's a lot to learn at once. How did you go about learning it, and what were some of the highs and lows along the way?
So I do think you have to have like a sense of naivety and a sense of like just blind optimism to start a business in general, and more so than ever in like, you know, the economic times that we're in now. Back when I did it in 2015, like, you know, the times were good, so it wasn't that bad, but there were a lot of learning journeys for me. I had never done a financial model. I was never someone who was comfortable with numbers. I didn't know what a CAC was, you know, customer acquisition cost, or any of these things. So I did a lot of research online, looked at spaces like Y Combinator on like how to make the right deck, a lot of like, you know, Seeders or Seed Legals and all these different kind of like companies that give you the paperwork. Really looked at those and thought, you know, how can I do it? I also had a co-founder at the time as well for a short period of time who had the experience of setting up a business. So we did a lot of that learning together. Like he did my SEIS assurance for me, the EIS assurance, explained what those meant. And then I did a couple of accelerators as well, which were really good to solidify what I had learned. So I'd actually been through the process of doing most of what they offered already, but it actually just solidified what I had learned. It gave me different perspective as well, because if you speak to like one person or two people, you know, you're learning everything from their view, but the more views and opinions that you get, it kind of is easier to galvanize solidly, like, you know, the best bits from it and what you think is going to be successful. So that's kind of like how I learn everything. And then there were some, I mean, you know, I didn't trademark Ohana to begin with, and that was really sticky. And I actually went somewhere the other day which had Ohana in my exact font, what I have trademarked, in the presentation at a pitch night I went to. And I turned up to the pitch night and I was like to the organizers, am I pitching? Because that's my logo up there. They're like, no, that's a different brand. And I was like, oh, that's so weird. Like, they obviously haven't looked into that. So it was like, you know, it's just things like that you need to look into that I wasn't aware of. And especially as a female founder as well, being really comfortable around those numbers, around the financial models, and being able to present yourself. I think what I learned, especially in the fundraising part of it, is, you know, what investors are looking for what, and understanding that as a founder and making sure that my financial model and my deck and my business plan is aligned with that. Because again, I think is another thing where we go out to raise money quite blindly and not understanding the metrics of what people look for. And not a lot of VC or investors give this feedback or make it very clear for you. And I think that's a really big kind of like hurdle that people meet as well. So yeah, I mean, there was so much to learn. I could go on forever.
And I definitely want to come back to those investor learnings, like what investors don't tell you, because you're now an angel as well, and really like galvanize around how do we help people get into these spaces. So we're definitely going to come back to that. So how does Ohana grow? What is the journey for the company? And at what point do you decide it's time for you to make a change?
So I registered Ohana in 2016. Was it 2016? And I didn't do anything with it until 2017. And I was like building up as I was at work. And then I wanted to take a 3-week holiday to America, and my boss wouldn't give me the time off. So I was like, okay, I quit. And then I was like, well, I have nothing else to do, so I have to do Ohana full time now. That's genuinely how it happened, essentially. I then at the same time co-founded Entourage Network, which is a platform, I think it's actually the biggest platform in Europe that encourages women and empowers women in the legal cannabis industry. So we saw this huge nascent industry, loads of people are making amazing money from it, loads of people are building these brilliant brands, but there's no historic, you know, like glass ceiling for women. So it's like, you know, how can we make sure that we equip these women and get them to the forefront of this industry, essentially, and share the network that me and Jessica, my co-founder at the time, had been building. She was doing her PhD at Oxford on a title that I can't actually ever remember, but it was something about the social impact of legalization of cannabis worldwide. Might not be the exact title, but it's something like that. So we had built up this community, and that's actually how I leveraged Ohana as well. It's like building up that community. And I was like, actually, this is something that I'm really good at. So let's leverage other brands, other communities. One of the hardest things about building a CBD business is that you cannot advertise in traditional ways. Getting a bank account was very difficult. You go to set up on Shopify, you can't use Stripe, you can't use PayPal, you can't use WildPay, you can't use any of these traditional payment methods. You have to go out and search for 100 European payment platforms to take one on. They want to have £10,000 up front. You know, it's so many, everyone's very confused. Is it legal? You onboard into a huge retailer. you then shut down their payment platform online because they're working with WorldPay or Visa or something, and then they're like, actually, we can't sell you anymore. So there are so many blocks and limitations that you actually have to do a lot of outside the box thinking. So for me, it was really good because we did like a 300 person event at the Curtain Club in Shoreditch where we hosted these events and got brilliant speakers. We did like, you know, a lot of good pop-ups and like brand partnerships, etc. And eventually, I mean, I closed down Ohana because it was my first time in entrepreneurship. I realized a lot of things. And one of the key things I realized is I hate product and I hate branding. Like, that's not my core skill set and what I really enjoy doing. But what was really good, it was a good way for me to realize that. And also CBD just can't grow in this market, like a CBD skincare brand. And I think that was a really important stage as well. I looked at the business, looked at how we were growing, and like, can we actually scale in the way that we need to? It could have absolutely continued as a lifestyle business, but that's not what I wanted to do at all. It's nothing that I was interested in. Like, if I was going to scale something, I wanted to scale it really big. And actually, I just had to rip the band-aid off and look at that it wasn't a plausible business to continue growing. And I'm actually quite good at ripping the band-aid off. I'm like, this isn't going to work, so, you know, I've explored all avenues, let me stop now. But I think it's harder for like other people to understand when they're like, you know, keep going. And I'm like, I'm not flogging a dead horse here. Like, you know, there's absolutely no point. So got on a bit of a tangent there, but that's basically some of the successes that I had with Ohana. And then also realizing when the right time is to close down and just being that responsible, and then looking back at the experience and realizing, you know, what was I good at, what was I bad at? Because as a founder, I think it's really important to be very self-aware and know what you're really good at and what you're really bad at. And there are some things that I learned that I was good at that I didn't think I was going to be. Like, you know, I started off hating numbers, but I ended up really liking financial models. And actually what I realized, I'm really good at like networking, I'm really good at investor landscape, I'm good at, you know, putting together, I understand what investors look for, and I'm able to put together a step-by-step guide for that. And actually I just had like a revelation that what I want to do, and because I'm someone who does like everything off passion, I think what's my personal mission in life, right? So like that is to support and empower every woman that I meet in any way that they want to be supported. How can I do that? By utilizing the main skills that I have and just being of service for others. And I know that's like quite a cheesy thing to say, and it's like, you know, a bit spiritual or religious or whatever, but I thought, you know, what is actually going to give me the most rewarding career that I can possibly have? And it was like giving back to others in any way that I can, and, you know, focusing on women first.
I love that, because when you're talking about the beginning, wanting to find like your version of art, something you're super passionate about that you would just want to do in any way you could, and now you're doing that for helping women. Love it. And I think this point about, because founders, actually it came up the other day in a panel I was on, like, how do you know when to stop? It is a question I think founders do find really hard. And I think one thing you touched on there was this self-awareness of, actually one thing you were excited by was building this high growth scale company, and that for you was a deal breaker. And I think founders, because of how much changes as you grow a company and how much you learn along the way, we sometimes forget to check in with our own deal breakers. Like, what would make me not start this now maybe is a reason to actually stop it. And you talked about obviously having learned a huge amount about investment. So let's talk about your next steps. Like, you shut down Ohana, you've realized what you do and don't love. Is Entourage still going at this point? Because obviously that's more community led, community focused. What do you do next?
I would say, going back to the piece of like knowing when to stop, because I think it's like so important, and people really need to be able to like reflect and realize and look at this. So if you're like doing something for like 3 years and it's not really moving the needle, it's probably not gonna work. And I just think that people need to be really comfortable. In America, it's like the culture, we trialed, we failed, let's move on, that's great, like on to the next thing. But in UK culture, we really have this thing like, you know, let's just like bleed it to the very end, and like until there's like nothing to salvage, and we just feel like really crap about ourselves. And actually we do need to take some of that mindset, like, no, you've done it, you've tried, it's like not plausible. And some things are out of our control, you know, like CPG at the moment is a really tough market. Some of that is going to be out of your control. Anything consumer related, a very tough market. So actually it's like, you know, understanding that, and maybe even putting on pause and be like, let me come back when the markets are better, or let me come back when I've learned a bit more, or just like looking around and seeing what you're good at. I just think that it's really important for founders to be able to realize that, and then just be proud of what you have accomplished. Like, when I think of things, it's like, you know, I shut down Ohana, I didn't sell it, I didn't exit, and I don't see that as a failure at all. And it's like, at the time it was really hard. People are like, oh, are you proud of what you've done? And I'm like, no, I failed. Like, this is crap. You just don't feel good about it. But actually, I'm like, I equipped myself and upskilled myself with so many key skills that have furthered my career and will further everything that I do in the future. I'm like, that's such a win. Like, it's good.
And as you say, you've learned so much about yourself in that process. Like, it is like personal learning on speed drive. But I love that you were so honest there, that you were like, now you look back and you're proud and you've taken a load of things. And at the time, people were saying the same question to you and you were like, no. And I think this is something for founders, when you're going through it and you listen to a podcast and someone says like, I feel this way, it can feel really unrelatable because they're years on and they've got like the benefit of space and time and processing. So maybe it's helpful if you're going through it or nearly going through it to remember, like, you probably won't feel like it now. Like, you're not going to feel like, yay, I failed at this thing I've poured effort into, but you probably will feel that in a few years to come. So what do you do next? Let's talk about like maybe moving into the angel space and investing, because you've learned so much about it. And maybe I'd love to unpick some of those learnings that you had in Ohana about the things that you had to educate yourself on because no one was telling you. How have you taken those to start educating founders about what they should know about fundraising?
So I think when I went to fundraise, I'm like a really inquisitive person. And if I get a no, I want to know like why. I actually was like speaking to someone about it this morning because they were like, what do you do if you get a, not rejection, but like a resistance or something like that? And I was just like, I want to know why. Like, I want to get all the information. I want to present it in a really logical way, and I really want to understand why. And I think that's what happened when I was raising, and it's like my business was not a VC backable business. And like, I'm pitching to all these VCs and I could raise angel, no problem, but I couldn't, it was a lot difficult to raise the VC. And I was like, why is this happening? And then they weren't forthcoming with the feedback. But I would just like ask again and again and really be like, okay, what do you look for? Like, what are the metrics that you need? And it was only by me asking those questions did I really understand what they needed to be. So, speaking to a VC that's like, we're going to invest 250K, but we need you to exit for 500 to 700 million in the next 5 to 7 years. Okay, no consumer brand is going to do that. The last one that has ever done that is probably Lululemon. If we're not in that same climate, that's probably not going to happen. From an angel perspective, great, you're still going to make some money if you 10x your valuation. That is not VC backable. Or an angel wants you to maybe more than 10x it, but a VC is going to want you to 10x it. That's not going to happen. So actually, that was when I was really drilling down into VCs. What are the metrics? What do you expect back? Is it possible? When was the last time someone did this? That's when I was really learning. And I was like, actually, why aren't people just telling me that? Why are you saying it's a no from us or it's not for us? And it's like, why don't you just tell me that? And it's the same reason why sometimes female founders don't raise as often as male founders. I mean, obviously there's so many reasons and unconscious bias and reasons why that happen. But a small part of the reason is that, women often build like solutions for themselves, and it's like that's not who we're pitching to half the time. So not to say that's the wrong thing, but it's the same with minority founders. If I'm going to pitch a hair care for Afro hair, I am selling to 3% of the UK population. I'm not going to convert 3% of the UK population. I'm going to present 1. So, is that 0.1% of the UK population going to get me a VC return? Maybe not. I don't know, but maybe not. So actually, these are really the metrics we're doing. And most founders start something from passion. That's another thing. We're starting from passion. We're not thinking, I need to go into tech because that's where all the good exits are. Or now I need to go into climate tech because that is where all the money is going. And it's actually like knowing what narrative those VCs want to hear, I think is really important in knowing how to get to that journey. So these are all the learnings anyway that I'm getting while I'm doing Ohana. I'm like, okay, this is how you raise. This is what they want to look for. This is what, the concurrent feedback on a good deck is over speaking to 100 VCs or 100 investors. I'm like, okay, I've got a lot of information. I can bypass other people having to go through those 100 conversations and feeling crap about themselves at the end of it and not getting the right feedback, and tell them this at the beginning. I sat on a call with a founder the other day and broke down their 38-page deck into a 15-page deck in 10 seconds. I was like, no one is ever going to look at this. No one was saying that to her though. And it was like blowing my mind. I was like, why is no one telling you 38 pages for a deck is way too long? Like, it was just so frustrating, right? So I found that I have a really good way of communicating that and just telling someone, this is the exact message, this is the exact narrative. And a lot of this journey through anything, any entrepreneurship or any like career is about narrative. And I'm really good at getting people's narratives out of them, honing that narrative and being like, this is your North Star and that's how you're going to go out there and get this stuff. So when I look back, that's what I realized when I did what I was good at Ohana. So I took that information and then just went into consulting. So just helping other founders getting ready to fundraise, getting them up to that fundraising point, doing their decks, financial models, having that narrative ready, and, you know, having an organized list of investors to go at what stage. Because as a first time founder, you're very like, you know, trying to think of a better word than scatty, but like, you know, you're very all over the place. You're very like looking at different places. You're, you know, oh, I've got a meeting with my favorite investor. Like, let me have that conversation with them. No, go and have a conversation with 10 crap investors first so you can do the learnings, you know. And also just be ready, especially as a female founder, to overcome some of those unconscious biases and negative questions that you are going to get, because that happens. They're going to ask you how you're going to survive the next 18 months instead of how you're going to thrive in the next 18 months, you know, how you're going to raise again, or, you know, understanding all these nuances that come into it in these conversations, like prepping a female especially to, like, you know, have that in place already, so giving them the best opportunity and the best preparation to go into it. Entourage Network I am no longer part of. That's like a very recent thing, just because cannabis is no longer my focus and it's very cannabis and plant medicine focused. And I was like, actually, that does not sit into the community that I'm building and that I have at the moment. I've since then also co-founded Alexandra Angels, which is a angel community to diversify cap tables. So essentially I'm angel investing. I want to get on, you know, the cap tables of excellent VC backable companies, and while I do that, I want to bring other small ticket, you know, early stage angels with myself as well, and open up those opportunities and democratize the kind of like angel investing landscape. That's what I'm really into. I've also joined Xena as a founding partner, which is a recruitment platform that looks to empower women in closing the gender gap in tech.
So you're not busy at all, nothing going on. I love those lessons, and I think there's so much in there. And I do think one thing you said so beautifully is that point around, I think sometimes we're almost scared to tell like women raising or founders of color raising, like, here are the stats. It's so negative, because you don't want to ever like make someone cap their ambition to make up for the space being shit. But actually it is helpful to know what to expect so you can overcome it. And it's helpful so that you're not shocked and you don't take it personally or think, oh, it's me there critiquing, like, this is a pattern, it is not you. And some people have to overcome it for it to break, and that can be you, but let's not like chase it for chasing its sake, and let's not be unrealistic about what we're about to go through. Are there any other big lessons that you've seen founders, that you've had to give founders because they just can't get them, because there is so much opacity in like what you can learn as a founder about fundraising, I think, until you've been through it or you know people who've been through it?
When you began that question, I thought, you know, what are the biggest like learnings or the biggest messages that I've said to founders recently? And I find the most successful founders, the good networks, they find an anchor. So it doesn't have to necessarily be it's really good if it's an investor, but that's not necessarily putting money, but that has an anchor that can be a referral for that person in the industry. So I anchor myself. I have some people that I ask to be an advocate for me in rooms that I'm not in, and that really serves me very well. And I think it's just like having the openness and having the ability to have those conversations and just find your tribe of people or advocates, or where your message and core values align with, and then making sure that those people are representing you in the rooms that you're in can be really helpful. That's where I see a lot of great founders falling down, because you can't be in every room and you can't be in every conversation. But the really successful raises that I've seen recently is people that just have good advocates. Those people go out and raise for you. I think it's about finding that person and getting them to do the raise for you, basically.
How on earth do you do that? So how do you know someone's going to be a good advocate? How do you, I guess, like two parts, like how do you ask them? Like that feels to me like asking, so it feels very like it's going to be uncomfortable, right? I've got to ask you like, hey, can you go and rep me everywhere I'm not? So how can founders get over that? Maybe emotional resistance, it feels really uncomfortable, and also know who to make that ask to.
I think you've just got to make it to someone who's in your industry and who's going to be really relevant and who's going to be in the spaces. So I do it by identifying a couple of different people. So someone in the public markets, someone in VC, someone who's just a really strong founder. So they're my 3 core people that I ask to represent me if in a room, or put me forward for opportunities, or to think there's going to be an advocate for me, you know, if I want to do something in the future with my career. And I think it's just like, you know, you're a founder, you're already quite ballsy, like you're going to go get it. You have some self-confidence, some level of arrogance to think that you are going to like be able to execute on this. So just use that to be really direct. And again, I think that one of the key really great skills about a founder is that you're going to have to do a lot of resourceful things and a lot of resourceful thinking. It's like, you know, that really outside the box thinking, you know, for example, I'm like 12 years, like, you know, with an exec search hat on. Also, most of the times I can think of people in really great spaces. It's like, you know, find someone like me. I think recruiters are often really undervalued people. They have really good networks. They, you know, especially if they're like, you know, in a long career, even as an angel investor, they probably have money. They probably have like, you know, a lot of doors. And I remember I used to do fintech, and we built the first teams for Deliveroo, Improbable, Algemy, Dark Trace, all these like $1 billion exits. And it's like, actually, you know, no one thinks of me if they think, you know, who is a great CMO that can scale a $1 billion startup, but actually like we are the people that have built these teams. So I would say, yeah, out the box thinking and just be really direct. And I think one of the things that like investors really like as well is that confidence, because they're going to have confidence in you to execute it. So I think that's really important.
That recruitment piece is such a good tip. We used to have a head of talent in the venture studio I worked in, and he had been part of building startup teams. And not only did that mean he was super smart, because he'd been looking at startups and understanding how different business models operated and what would be a driver for growth. So he had this incredible business mindset, but also he knew loads of people who could ask. And he would say, oh, you should chat to so, and they'll have a really interesting take on this. That's such a good tip. And so now you're operating in these angel spaces. I love that you're bringing more people into the angel spaces, and we actually met through Andy Aim, who runs Angel Investing School. So if anyone's thinking of like, I want to be an angel, like that's a good place to start learning about it as well. Are there any things that have surprised you as you've spoken to more angels, like through this process, maybe new lessons that you didn't learn on Ohana, but you've spoken to angels along the way and thought, oh, it's really interesting, there seems to be this pattern of thinking or these patterns that founders should know about?
What have I learned? I have learned that you need to speak to as many people as possible to be able to form your own idea. You know, some angel investors like, you have to have a thesis. You have to have a strong thesis and stick to that thesis and don't go out of it because you're never going to be successful. And I'm just like, no, I don't believe that, like, at all. You know, so there's like things like that which I've come across when I'm like, actually people are out there saying that with a really strong message. And like, I've seen enough opinions now to like not actually agree with that. So I think the main lesson I've learned is that you need to speak to as many people as possible. You need to immerse yourself in these communities, because we all just learn on the job, right? For me, the best place to learn is on the job, in the grit of things, in these ecosystems, speaking to as many people as possible, and really just taking each learning as my own and forming my own really strong opinions and validation on how I want to execute on things. For me, that has been the most successful way. Some people learn from podcasts, from books, from things like that. But for me, I am like such a people's person. I love to talk. I can talk for days, as I'm sure that you can tell. But, you know, I just think that that's the key way that I have learned. And I do a lot of things with intention as well. And I think if you map out things with intention, then you're going to be a lot more successful. So at the moment, you know, numbers, again, is like a thing that I'm getting better at each day. It's not something that I'm born with. I'm not born good at maths. Like, I'm good at talking. I'm good at, you know, like networking. I'm good at like just being very strong in my like convictions of things or my confidence. I'm not good at maths. So I have to do extra courses. And I ask the questions, you know, I'm like, how are you going to work out that EBITDA? Explain it to me. How are you going to be able to work out the lifetime value of the customer acquisition. I ask a lot of questions around the financial modeling of things. You know, I ask my accountant, I ask like anyone that I meet that is good at math and is going to be able to tell me these things, I ask them. And that is with intention, because I know the rest of the stuff that I can do quite well. But if I want to be like at the level I want to be at to learn that, I've got to ask those questions. So they have been like my learns in how I learn. But I think, again, it's a self-awareness thing. It's about being very aware about your learning styles, how you learn, and how you can best equip yourself with that knowledge to be the best angel investor or the best anything that you wanted to be, basically.
And that's true for being a founder, right? You're so spot on. So, final 2 questions. First question is, and there's been a lot, so I'll let you pick one from being a founder and one from being an angel, but proudest moments.
Proudest moment being a founder was hosting an event, selling out an event for 300 people at the Curtain Club, getting excellent like world-class speakers and excellent world-class brands involved. I think on a team of 2, that was no small feat. And actually, for marketing purposes, that's why I say to people, you can do a lot and reach a lot without spending any money. There was no way we could spend, because it was a CBD brand. So as a founder, and also as a black female founder, raising over 200 grand, I was really proud of as well. And they're like my 2 top things I'm proud of as a founder. And also my number one thing, knowing when to quit. Actually, I'm going to say that is my number one thing I'm proud of, is knowing when to quit and knowing that this is not a scalable business. I think that is my number one thing I'm proud of. Forget the rest of it. That's my number one. As an angel investor, I just did a great deal with Ada Ventures as a scout, introducing Material Nexus, this brilliant deal. And I'm just so happy that, like, you know, it was for me, it was just like the most amazing founder, the most amazing team. And I'm just really proud that I was able to support them in their growth, and I'm able to support them above and beyond. I'm as proud that I could get in an investor, and that I was able to open up their cap table for so many other small ticket angel investors as well. I'm like, you know, that's kind of like exactly what I want to do. And there was a couple of other deals as well that I've done this year that, like, you know, haven't been so public, but it's kind of like under the same remit.
Love that. And I'm only laughing because Material Nexus has come up so much in my last like week. I think I saw your post saying you'd invested. My boyfriend turned out he'd done some advisory stuff for them before, so I was hearing about them in the same week. I was like, they're everywhere. I love it. Go check them out. Amazing startup, really interesting. We'll put the link in the show notes. They're awesome. Let's give them a shout out. Okay, final question. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
The best piece of advice that I actually live my entire life by, and that's including when I was diagnosed with MS, when I failed at something, is don't cry over spilt milk. I think that's just like how I live my life, basically, which I know sounds a bit like nonchalant, but it's like it gives me the tools to be able to fail, get back up and start, which essentially leads me to success.
Can I unpack that a bit more? Because I just love the bit, and it feels like it ties in with the bit you said earlier about like how you were able to move on from like and reclass failure. Does that not crying happen in the moment? Or is that just the not crying? Is that your instinctive response? Or is that something you have to like work on and work through? How does it happen? Because we talked earlier about like for founders, like shutting down your business, like it doesn't feel that good in the moment and you kind of have to like work through that process. So for you, like how does that not crying over spilt milk like actually happen? Is it a deliberate thing? Is it a natural thing?
There is so much that I could do to unpack this, but it's probably too personal to my personality type, to be honest. Like it'd be like an hour's therapy session. That's like another podcast. Like, why can I do this so easy, right? But I think it is a resilience that I've just built through life, essentially. Also, it's a very natural instinct if I'm being really honest. It's just a very natural thing for me to get what someone else might take as really bad news and find it really sad and be really down about it. But it's my natural thing to be like, okay, how am I going to turn this into a positive? How am I going to own this for my own narrative? How am I going to make sure that this doesn't actually get me down? And it's some sort of like, I don't even know. Like sometimes I'm like, maybe it's like an emotional stunt. Maybe I'm emotionally stunted. I'm not too sure, to be honest. But I do see it as like a really core personality trait of mine. I'm aware of that. I'm actually really able that something bad can happen or something that's perceived as bad. And I am going to be like, that is okay. I'm going to accept it for what it is. I'm going to turn it into something positive. Like with my MS, I was like, that is okay. You know, then I found me on my journey to being able to help and support other people on that. And actually, I just did a lot of research and a lot of like, you know, how can I thrive with this rather than how can I be sad with it, you know? And it's the same with my career. It's like, you know, okay, my first startup failed. That's okay. How can I thrive with it? So I'm not going to cry over that spilt milk.
And I think it's super inspirational. I think back at some of the guests we've had, and like it does seem a bit of a shared trait. You know, you actually turn these, like, being emotionally stunted is how to be a good founder, turns out. But you know, we had Alexia on, who talked about, like, she got diagnosed with cancer. She didn't even get through chemo before she started a company, because she was like, I don't want other people to go through it like I've been through it. And we had another founder on, Jackie, who just talked about losing both her parents in very quick succession, and actually kind of thinking, well, like, maybe I'm just going to quit or take redundancy because, hey, shit happens and I want to get on and do something else. So I do think, yeah, there is a lot to be inspired by there. And however you process it, like if you're listening and you are a crier first, like that's fine too. But like, I love that reframing part of like, I get to decide how this shapes my narrative and my next steps. And I think that's powerful, even if it takes you a bit longer to get there than Jasmin, who's got it on lock. There's been so much in this. Thank you so much for sharing so much, so rapidly. I loved having you on the show.
Thank you so much. And I do think that's just really important as well to, again, it doesn't have to be a fast process and everyone goes in their own time. And I think that's completely okay. But I think like the number one thing from this conversation that I'm taking away and what I'm really going to think about is actually as a founder being just really self-aware and doing things like your personality type and, you know, asking other people, having that therapy and having really like unusual, deep conversations with yourself and with others to understand, you know, how can you best go forward in life. So, but thank you very much.
Love it. Thank you for listening. Shows like ours grow when listeners like you shout about us from the rooftops. So if you're feeling extra generous today, why not share your favourite episode or your top takeaway from this one on social media, in a WhatsApp chat with fellow founders, or any Slack groups you're in. And don't forget to tag us online. And for those of you curious what I get up to when not interviewing founders for this show, I have a new startup, If We Raise, aiming to get expertise and capital to underrepresented founders earlier. You can follow what my co-founder Tim and I are up to via @IfWeRaiseTogether on Instagram or @IfWeRaise on LinkedIn and Twitter. We'll be sharing our lessons learned along the way, as well as highlighting the incredible founders and angel investors joining the If We Raise journey.
One of the most annoying things that can happen to any of us is getting cold outreach that feels like the company hasn't done any research on you. So it's no surprise that investors like outreach from founders that feels like they've actually researched them. That's why I was so excited when the founder of ShipShape.vc, Daniel, reached out to me about sponsoring this episode. ShipShape.vc is a search engine that's free for founders to use to find investors who have been sharing content that shows they're interested in startups like you. I've already been talking about ShipShape.vc on panels I've been on and to founders I coach, because I genuinely think it could be a massive game changer for startups. There's a link in the show notes to learn more if you're interested.